This was the first Formula 2 weekend ever in Qatar at the Losail circuit. The circuit is raced like a high-speed Imola. It's hard to overtake unless there's a big pace delta between the car behind and the car in front. You have to have a skill to line up the pass, have to drive very well. There's a few things to take away from this weekend. Firstly, Gabriel Bortoleto drove wonderfully this weekend. He drove fantastically. If I had any reservations about Gabriel Bortoleto before this weekend, which I did, or if you had any reservations about him or how good he may or may not be, he's proved everyone wrong here in Qatar. His defensive driving in the feature race was just superb. He was under so much pressure because he's got the cars on the hard tyres on the alternative strategy backing him up into Paul Aron. And Paul Aron is very fast in the high-tech, and Paul Aron is trying to overtake Bortoleto at any chance he can get, while Bortoleto has to defend from Paul Aron and he has to attack the drivers in front. And especially Pepe Marti wasn't very helpful in letting Bortoleto pass. I mean, nor should he be, but Bortoleto's dealing with it on two fronts, and he somehow kept that car on the road, not made any mistakes, not even the small mistakes. He's just been soaked up all the pressure and did what he had to do. It's the very first time in 2 years watching Bortoleto race in Formula 3 and Formula 2 that he sounded strained on the radio. But that's the takeaway. The big takeaway is, wow, he's a very impressive driver. Now, as for the weekend as a whole, the sprint race was a slow burn. There was a strong tyre offset. We had Hadjar and Behrman go way out into the distance. At the start of the race, Martin's holding up the rest of the pack with some very stout defending, but towards the end of the race, his tyres went off and he got passed left, right and centre. He's dropped out of the points. Hadjar eventually was passed by Behrman. It's very hard, as I said, very hard to overtake. Now Isaac Hadjar had a spin. That's a very costly spin for Isaac Hadjar. He's lost some points there. I'd say about 3 points. I think you get 8 points for second place in the sprint race, and you get 5 for fourth place. So 3 points he's lost, and that could become very crucial at the end of the year. Another two drivers I want to talk about. Paul Aron. Paul Aron looked incredibly quick all weekend. And we've seen this from Paul Aron. He has pace, but he doesn't always convert that pace into big points. But this weekend, he's looked super quick. I want to talk about Oliver Behrman. Oliver Behrman, other than those three drivers, is probably the best driver this weekend. He's very unlucky in the feature race for the timing of the safety car, but he was really fast. At the end of the feature race, he's a long way ahead of the other alternative strategy runners. I think he's about, let me see, at the end of the feature race, Behrman was 33 seconds off the lead, and he's 13 seconds ahead of Joshua Dirksen. That was the next alternative strategy runner. So he's had blistering pace. I think there were 16 clean laps after the safety car came in. So that's almost a second a lap on Joshua Dirksen. That's really good pace. If it wasn't for that safety car, he could have been in contention for fifth, fourth, maybe a podium, probably not quite a podium, but that was excellent race pace. Now, for the feature race, we've seen a very exciting race in the feature race. It's very much on the edge all the way through. We had, because of that safety car, as I explained before, we had the top three competitors running line of stern. You know, we had Bortoletto, Aaron, and Hadjar all trying to defend and pass at the same time as they're trying to make their way through the drivers that haven't stopped yet. That was incredible. That was very exciting. And then at the end, out of nowhere, Oliver Goethe has all this pace. He's almost going to take Hadjar. And in those last couple of laps, you're watching the gap between, Bortoletto's got that 5-second penalty, which is silly. But anyway, he's got a 5-second penalty. And we kept seeing the live updates, sector to sector. Where's Bortoletto compared to Hadjar? Is he going to finish ahead? Is he going to, and then Goethe almost overtakes Hadjar. It's like real suspense. Like Formula 2 usually delivers a very good race, and this was one of the best of an really very exciting season to watch. That was in the feature race. We've seen some drivers that we didn't expect in the points. A lot of that's because some of the drivers we do expect to score points, such as Antonelli or Martins, have had incidents. Another point is a lot of drivers on the alternative strategy, so that took the likes of Behrman, Dirksen out of play. So we're seeing drivers like Christian Mansell in the points. John Bennett on debut was a lap down after the first lap, but he's come back to 8th place. I don't know why the two Roden cars had no pace towards the end. That leads to the driver rating. Going by car number, we start with Victor Martins. I'll give Victor Martins a 5 out of 10. He's had too many incidents. He's had underlying pace. He hasn't converted that pace into points though, but the pace is obviously there. Like third on the grid in qualifying was very good. Luke Browning, no, I'll give him a 3, and I think that's a bit generous. He's shown nothing this weekend. He spun out towards the end of qualifying. No points in either race. I suppose pace was reasonable in the sprint race. Oliver Behrman, I'm giving him an 8 for the reasons I outlined earlier in my video, that he was quick. He was just unlucky with the timing of the safety car. But Andrea Kimi Antonelli, I'm very sorry. I'm a big fan, but I have to give him a 2 out of 10. That was a very poor weekend. He's stepping into a Mercedes F1 car next year, but he looked very average. He was incident prone, slow, no pace. It's a bit hard to... You have to judge that very harshly. Now, Zane Maloney, it's a bit sad because this is his last race. He's not going to make it to Formula 1. He doesn't even have a reserve driver role. Hopefully he's happy in Formula E. He couldn't go out with the next, like a podium or something. He's got a couple of points. I think he's done well to recover a poor grid position. So I'll give him a 5 out of 10. I'll give Tomo Miyata a 5. He's been feisty. He finished in the points in both races, but I suppose he deserved his penalty in the sprint race. As I said, for whatever reason, the Roden cars towards the end of the feature race had no pace. They were overtaken by Omri Cordeal and John Bennett. It's crazy. I have to give Jack Crawford a 5. He had an excellent sprint race and then had an accident in the feature race. He's not backing up his... Jack Crawford is very good at having a good sprint race, but then he doesn't always have a good feature race. Now, Dino Beganovic gets an 8. Dino Beganovic has struggled in Formula 3, but he's taken to Formula 2 like a duck to water. I hope for his sake that High-Tech have a good car next year. He might be a dark horse for the championship up against the likes of Martins, Fornaroli, Mini, Crawford, depending on how good that High-Tech is. He's put it 4th on the grid when a lot of people were struggling for pace. He's backed that up with the good points in the feature race. Kush Miney, I've given him a 2. So I'll give Dino Bogdanovic an 8. I'll give Kush Morning a 2 because he had no pace. He's coming towards the end of the second season. He's done F3 as well. He should be fast now, but he's absolutely slow. It's not acceptable. Gabriel Bortoleto gets a 10. As I said, Champions Drive. He was flawless all weekend. The only thing is that he was out-qualified by Paul Aron, but his race start was excellent. He did everything he needed to do. He managed risk while maximising speed. Terrific job by Gabriel Bortoleto, and I have to say, thoroughly deserves his promotion to Formula One. Richard Verschoor, I'll give Richard Verschoor a 5 out of 10. His qualifying was good. He looked quick in the MP, and he was okay in the sprint race. He was very good in the sprint race, but he had so many incidents in the feature race. So it's a weekend of two halves for Verschoor. I have to give Oliver Goethe, I've put an 8 here. I'm going to bump that up to an 8.5. He had so much pace at the end of the feature race. That was very impressive. He had a deplorable Baku weekend. He was just full of incidents, but here he's done a sensational job. And so is another driver in his first F2 race. He hasn't even raced in F3 yet as John Bennett, but I don't think so. He's jumped up from GB3 to F2, and he's come home in 8th. He's had to come... I mean, obviously the safety car helped him get his lap back. He was lapped, but he's hung in there, and he's overtaken Maloney. He's overtaken Miyata to take 8th place. That's a very good job, so I'll give him an 8 out of 10. Rafael Villagomez was 8/10 slower than Bennett in qualifying. To me, that's unacceptable. So I give Rafael Villagomez a 2 out of 10. I have to give Omri Cordial a 5 out of 10. He was slow all weekend. He's almost 2 seconds slower than Paul Aron in qualifying. 2 seconds. Unbelievable. And yet somehow he gets 7th place in the feature race. It just shows sometimes slow and steady. Well, they don't win the race, but they get the points. At the end of the day, a good save by Cordial, but there's no pace there from Cordial. He's just, I think his 7th place is more down to experience, just knowing how to keep the car on track and benefiting from other people's mistakes. Coming to his teammate Paul Aron, I'll give him an 8.5. He's a couple of small mistakes there. He bottled the start. He's ran into the side of Victor Martins in the sprint race, got a penalty. I think the penalty's silly. It's a small tap. He's just banged wheels a bit. I think it's really silly, but anyway, they love giving penalties these days. But especially bottling the start. He's improved, right? Remember the Hungaroring, Paul Aron was on pole there, and he sunk back down the field, and in his desperation he's hit the back of Maloney, whereas here in Qatar he's sinking. He was sinking through the field. They were swallowing him up, and somehow through turn 1 he got back up to 2nd place and rescued the weekend. So I think he's improved. He's learning from his mistakes, but his starts are bad. He's bottling his starts, so I'll have to give him an 8.5. Obviously, his raw pace is unbelievable. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Now, Isaac Hadjar, giving him a 7. He lacked pace all weekend, and yet somehow, through the safety car, he's been brought back into play. And I suppose he made the most of it, staying within 5 seconds of Bortoleto. Bortoleto had free air. Hadjar had Aron in front of him, and he had Goethe behind him, and he's trying to bridge the gap, keep a good gap between him and Bortoleto while defending from Goethe. It's a good job he's done there to hang on to that third on the road, which became second. So I give Hajar a 7 out of 10, but he's made a big mistake in the sprint race. It's cost him. Pepe Marti, I just give him a 1 out of 10. The gap between him and Hajar now is like the gap between Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. It's so big. And he's always having incidents. He's barely scored any points since Bahrain. It's a really bad season. I'll give him 1 out of 10. Max Esterson had some promising pace, but he absolutely lacked pace in the feature race. I'll have to give him a 4 out of 10. Christian Mansell looked slow all weekend. A long way behind Max Esterson in qualifying. That just doesn't make sense at all. Esterson was an F3 midfielder, and Mansell has been a podium finisher regularly in 2024. He looked quick in bucket and he's just slow here, and somehow he's sixth in the feature race. I don't really understand it, but I think it's a very good drive somehow, so I'll give him a 6 out of 10. I'm concerned by his lack of pace. He looked very slow in qualifying and in the sprint race. I'll give Joshua Dirksen a 5 out of 10. Dirksen had reasonable pace, but it's hard to judge him because he's caught out by the safety car in the feature race, but he's a long way behind Behrman, and they were right next to each other when the safety car pulled in at the end of lap 16, I think it was. So, that's a lot of time loss. I'm going to give Chian Shields a 2 out of 10. Chian Shields looks like another Niels Coulin. Chian Shields is not quite as slow as Niels Coulin, but he's still very slow. He somehow finished 11th. As I said, that's more to do with other people's undoing, sort of like Mansell, Cordeal. They're getting the points, decent points, but it's more to do with how they got those points. So I 2 out of 10 for Chian Shields. Last thing I want to say, Paul Aaron has been dropped by Mercedes. Now he's been taken up by Alpine. Paul Aaron looks to be very fast. His underlying speed, he looks like the fastest driver there. He looks like, and I'm adjusting, right? In my mind, I'm adjusting because I think Paul Aaron is further along in the development curve compared to, say, Kimi Antonelli, right? But he's been that fast in qualifying this season. I'm not sure with Antonelli's development. I see him being considerably faster, even taking into account the possibility of Kimi Antonelli having more development. I see Paul Aaron still being as fast as him in the future. It's been very impressive from Paul Aaron in the qualifying. As some of his racecraft is lacking. His racecraft needs improvement. He can't be making mistakes off the line, slow starts, can't be having silly incidents where he picks up 5-second time penalties. I think a 5-second time penalty cost him somewhere earlier in the year. I think at Austria he got a 5-second time penalty for a bit of contact. So that's costing him points as well. He's lost points in the sprint race. I think it's a silly penalty, but he was going to get past Martins anyway. He's given him a bit of wheel banging and got a penalty. He's lost some points there. He's technically still mathematically possible can win the championship, but highly unlikely. He's 25.5 points behind Bortoleto. But to me, Paul Aaron should be the favourite to win this championship, and it's mistakes like some of the ones he's made that's kept him out of the title contention to some point. I think he should win the championship based on his pace, but the mistakes have cost him. Going into the final round, hopefully we have an exciting race, and yeah, that's it.